Welcome to the Deep Dive. This is where we explore a fascinating subject, look at our research, and bring you the key insights pretty quickly and clearly.
That's the plan.
So today we're tackling Rivers of Discord, the Indus Waters Treaty. It's all about that interplay between history, geography, economics, and law.
Yeah, and this came from your interest as a listener in getting up to speed on complex global issues without, reading a whole textbook.
Exactly. Now, I know a water treaty might not sound like the most exciting thing on the surface.
Huh. Maybe not initially.
But trust us, this story, it's got layers. It connects ancient history, big political shifts, the land itself, economic survival, and, well, the fine print of international law.
It really does. It's a perfect case study, actually, of how these different fields just smash together in the real world.
Just think about the Indus River basin itself. I mean, it's not just any river system. It's one of the cradles of civilization.
Right. Incredibly ancient roots there.
And this huge area shared by multiple countries.
Mhm.
It's not just lines on a map. The geography has shaped history, and history and geography keep shaping the politics, the culture, everything.
And the irrigation. We're talking about the largest single irrigation network on the planet. It's a lifeline, truly.
So the big question we're digging into is, how does a treaty about water, something so essential, become both a source of cooperation and ongoing friction between two major players like India and Pakistan?
Let's start maybe with the historical currents. How did we even get to needing a treaty in the first place?
Good idea. So before 1947, before partition, the Indus was obviously vital. Our research shows amazing irrigation systems going way, way back.
Thousands of years, yeah.
Sophisticated stuff. And empires like the Delhi Sultanate, the Mughals, they built huge canal networks. Water management was always, central.
What's interesting, though, is that tensions over water weren't new even then. Before partition, different provinces, different regions were already competing.
Like the Punjab Sindh dispute.
Exactly. That's a good early example of these sorts of allocation arguments happening within the subcontinent itself.
Then boom, 1947, partition. The Radcliffe Line draws a border right through this incredibly integrated canal system.
It's hard to overstate the impact of that. Imagine, like you said, trying to divide the plumbing of one building between two new owners who aren't exactly friendly.
Right. So disruption was almost guaranteed. They tried initially to sort of keep the pre-partition sharing arrangements going.
They did, but it quickly became clear that wasn't sustainable. Negotiations stalled pretty badly between 47 and 50.
And this is where the approaches differed, right? Pakistan was suggesting bringing in the International Court of Justice.
Yes, they wanted third-party mediation. But India, our sources say, really preferred bilateral talks. They wanted to sort it out between themselves, keep it, regional.
Okay, so things are deadlocked. Then comes David Lilienthal in 1951. He had experience with big water projects in the U.S., like the TVA.
Right, the Tennessee Valley Authority. His visit was key. He suggested this idea of joint management, joint control.
And that idea was the catalyst.
It seems so. It really prompted the World Bank to get involved, to step in as a sort of mediator or facilitator.
Which must have been a huge task.
Oh, definitely. So by 1953, you had both India and Pakistan putting forward their own plans for dividing the Indus waters.
And surprise, surprise, the plans were very different.
Radically different, yeah. Which led the World Bank, after a lot of back and forth, to propose its own solution.
Which was?
Basically, stop trying to just share the water from the whole system and instead divide the rivers themselves.
Ah, okay. So allocate specific rivers to each country.
Exactly. The eastern rivers, the Ravi, Beas, and Sutlej would go to India. The western rivers, the Indus, Jhelum, and Chenab, would go to Pakistan.
That's a fundamental shift. Was it based on, the most efficient use, or?
Not necessarily. It seems it was more pragmatic, maybe reflecting who already had more control or infrastructure on which rivers. It solved the immediate deadlock, but you could argue it baked in some future issues, perhaps.
And we have to remember the background noise, right? The Cold War context.
Absolutely crucial. The 1950s. Kashmir was already a massive point of contention. Pakistan joined security pacts like CETO and CENTO, aligning with the West.
Well, India was pursuing non-alignment, but developing ties with the Soviet Union.
So all that geopolitical tension is swirling around these water negotiations. It wasn't happening in a vacuum.
Okay, so that sets the historical stage. The tensions, the partition mess, the World Bank stepping in with this river division plan. But to really get why this treaty matters so much day to day, we need to look at the geography and the economics.
For sure. Geographically, it's interesting. The Indus River starts way up in Tibet. Its main headwaters are actually in India.
Right. But where does most of the water get used, especially for irrigation?
That's the key. The bulk of the command area, the land irrigated by the system, is in Pakistan.
And the main rivers are the Indus itself, plus the Hellam and Chenab in the west.
Those are the western rivers allocated to Pakistan, though India has some existing uses there, especially in Kashmir.
And then the Ravi, Bees, and Sutlej in the east.
Those are the eastern rivers allocated to India.
And economically, how dependent are they?
Hugely dependent, both countries.
Yeah.
Especially for agriculture, which is massive in both economies, feeding millions.
And for Pakistan, things like the Mangla Dam on the Jhelum, that's critical for power generation too, isn't it?
Absolutely. It's a major source of electricity.
Now, what about the hydropower potential on the western rivers, the ones allocated to Pakistan but flowing through Indian territory, particularly Jammu and Kashmir?
That's a really important point. Jammu and Kashmir contributes a huge amount of water to the system. Something like 80% of the western river's flow originates or passes through there.
But the treaty puts limits on what India can do with that water in terms of power generation.
Yes. India is allowed what are called run-of-the-river projects. Basically, projects that use the river's natural flow to generate power without building large storage dams. But there are very specific technical constraints on how these can be designed and operated. Annexure D of the treaty goes into a lot of detail.
Okay, so no big storage dams on the western rivers for India, with some minor exceptions laid out elsewhere.
Pretty much. Which leads to the perspective from within Jammu and Kashmir.
Right. They see all this water flowing through their region, huge hydro potential, but feel they can't fully benefit economically because of the treaty's restrictions, both for hydro and potentially for expanding irrigation.
Our sources mention this gap between the potential irrigated area in J&K and what the treaty seems to allow India to develop on the western rivers.
So you've got this geographical setup where the water starts in one place, is mainly used downstream in another, and the people in the upstream region feel constrained.
Exactly. And all of this feeds into the legal framework, the Indus Waters Treaty itself, signed in Karachi in 1960.
Often called a remarkable achievement.
It was, in many ways. It was explicitly designed to stop water from becoming a cause for war by laying out who gets what.
So the core idea, eastern rivers to India, western rivers to Pakistan.
That's the headline. But the fine print matters, especially regarding India's use of those western rivers flowing through its territory before they reach Pakistan.
What is India allowed to do on the western rivers?
Okay, several things. Domestic use, drinking water, sanitation, that sort of thing. Non-consumptive uses like navigation or flood control. Some limited agricultural use, basically capped at the levels existing back when the treaty was signed.
And the hydropower we mentioned.
Yes, the run-of-the-river projects, but again, under strict design criteria detailed in Annexure D. Things like limiting the pondage, the amount of water held back temporarily. And crucially, no major storage dams, except for some very specific allowances in Annexure E.
And Pakistan's side of the bargain.
They get the right to the unrestricted flow of those western rivers, subject to India's permitted uses upstream.
Okay. And how is all this monitored? How do they make sure it's working?
That's the job of the Permanent Indus Commission, the PIC.
The joint body.
Right. One commissioner from India, one from Pakistan. They're meant to cooperate, share data, resolve questions about interpretation, do inspections of river works. They're supposed to meet regularly, at least annually.
Kind of like the U.S.-Canada Joint Commission, apparently.
Yeah, that was an inspiration for the model. Promote cooperation and handle routine issues.
But what if they can't agree? What if there's a serious disagreement?
The treaty has a whole dispute resolution mechanism for that. It's laid out in Article 9X and detailed in Annexures F and G. It's tiered.
Tiered how?
Okay, so first level, you have questions. These are supposed to be sorted out by the PIC itself. Simple issues, ideally.
And if they can't?
Then it can become a difference. If the PIC agrees, or if one side feels strongly, a difference can be referred to a neutral expert. This expert looks at the technical issue and gives an opinion, though it's generally not binding.
Still not resolved.
Then it escalates to a dispute. This is the most serious level. The treaty says disputes should first be tackled through negotiation. If that fails, maybe mediation. And the final step, if absolutely necessary, is a court of arbitration.
And have we seen these mechanisms used? Have there been differences or disputes?
Oh, yes. This is where much of the recent friction is played out. Pakistan has repeatedly raised objections to Indian hydropower projects on the western rivers.
Like Baglihar, Kishanganga.
Those are two prominent examples, yes.
Yeah.
Chutak and Nimobaz go as well. Pakistan's concerns usually focus on the technical designs.
What specifically?
Things like the amount of pondage, the height and type of spillways used to release excess water, the design of the intakes for the turbines. Pakistan argues these designs violate the specific technical limits in the treaty and could affect the timing and volume of water flowing downstream.
In India's position.
India maintains these are standard run-of-the-river designs, fully compliant with Annexure D and other treaty provisions. They argue the designs are necessary for safe and efficient operation, especially dealing with silt during monsoons, for instance.
There's also the issue of sharing project information, right?
Yes. India is supposed to provide detailed project designs to Pakistan at least 6 months before starting construction. Pakistan has sometimes claimed these details are delayed or incomplete, making it hard for them to assess the projects and raise objections within the treaty's timelines.
It sounds like the sheer technical complexity of the treaty opens the door to these differing interpretations.
Absolutely. You're dealing with highly specialized engineering and hydrological concepts. Even experts can disagree on interpreting Annexure D, for example. Our sources definitely highlight that technical ambiguity.
One point raised in our research was about the aim of the treaty. Was it purely about equitable sharing?
That's a really interesting argument. Some analysis suggests that while it prevented conflict, its primary basis might have been more about recognizing the de facto control and usage patterns that existed around the time of partition, rather than striving for some ideal, perfectly fair distribution based on future needs or potential, sort of locking in the status quo.
A pragmatic piece, maybe, rather than perfect equity.
Perhaps. And now, layered on top of all that history and technical detail, you have climate change.
Right. Melting glaciers in the Himalayas, changing rainfall, unpredictable river flows.
These are huge new challenges that the treaty, written in 1960, didn't explicitly foresee or address. How does the system cope when the fundamental water availability might be changing? That's a massive question.
So let's try to pull these threads together. Why does a 60-year-old water treaty still matter so much?
Because it's completely entangled with the broader India-Pakistan relationship. A relationship marked by, let's face it, a lot of mistrust and several conflicts.
So water becomes another potential flashpoint.
It can be, yes. Or at least another area where existing tensions play out. There have even been unsubstantiated claims in the past, during conflicts like the 1965 war, about water being used strategically, though that's highly contested.
And domestically, within both countries.
Huge political resonance. Public opinion is sensitive. Any perceived threat to water security gets attention. In India and Kashmir, as we said, groups push for more water use. In Pakistan, particularly downstream in Sindh perhaps, there's real anxiety that Indian projects upstream threaten their agricultural lifeline.
And these anxieties get linked back to the treaty.
Directly. It becomes part of the political narrative. Farmers' concerns in Pakistan, for example, are often framed in terms of India potentially violating the treaty on the western rivers.
There's also a darker concern mentioned in some analyses.
The risk that worsening water scarcity could fuel instability, yes. That's a serious worry for the whole region. Could it even become something exploited by non-state actors?
Yeah.
It's a sobering thought.
So given all this potential for conflict, all these disputes, what's the bottom line on the treaty's success?
Well, here's the remarkable thing. Despite everything, the wars, the crises, the technical disagreements both countries have, by and large, stuck to the treaty's mechanism.
So they haven't just walked away from it.
No. The Permanent Indus Commission, the PIC, has met well over 100 times. Disputes have gone to neutral experts, even to the Court of Arbitration. They use the process even when they fundamentally disagree.
Which suggests the treaty itself, the framework, has a certain resilience.
Exactly. It's provided a way to manage, if not always resolve, the conflicts. It has prevented water from becoming an actual cause of war, which was its primary goal.
So looking forward, what do the sources say? Do we need a new treaty?
There are definitely arguments for renegotiating or updating it. To explicitly include climate change impacts, maybe address groundwater, perhaps revisit the allocations considering current needs and the J&K perspective.
But others argue.
Others argue the current treaty is flexible enough. It's interpreted cooperatively. And they point out that neither country is even fully using all the water it's currently entitled to under the existing treaty. So maybe the issue isn't the treaty itself, but implementation and cooperation.
So quite different viewpoints there.
Very much so.
Okay, let's try to summarize this deep dive then. The Indus Waters Treaty emerges from this really complex post-partition history.
Dealing with tough geographical realities, where the water is versus where it's most needed and the huge economic reliance of both India and Pakistan on this single river system.
Its legal framework, that division of rivers and the rules for usage, was a major achievement in preventing war.
But the technical details and the inherent mistrust in the broader relationship mean it's also been a continuous source of debate and diplomatic friction. It's a story of both enduring cooperation and persistent conflict.
It really shows how something as basic as sharing water gets tangled up in absolutely everything else. History, politics, economics, law. It's far from simple.
Definitely not just about hydrology.
Which leads us to a final thought for you, the listener. Given these mounting pressures, climate change, shrinking glaciers, growing populations needing more water, how can the Indus Waters Treaty adapt? Will its built-in resilience be enough for the future challenges?
Or does something more fundamental need to change? And what lessons can we draw from this decades-long experience for other parts of the world where countries share scarce water resources? There are many such places.
Lots to think about there. We really encourage you to check out the sources we used or maybe explore related areas. International water law is fascinating, the deeper history of India-Pakistan relations, or the science of climate change impacts on water.
There's always more to uncover.
Thanks for joining us for this deep dive.